There we go. Hello, everyone. We are live. Welcome to the HSE Half Hour. My name's Lauren. I'm Head of Networks and Communications at Executive Network Group. Usually I'm joined by my colleague Laura Aucott, who today is sunning herself up on holiday. So I have a very special guest speaker with me, who I will introduce shortly. Really looking forward to this episode of the show. So as Head of Networks and Communications at E&G, I work closely with Laura and our health and safety team, looking at research, creating white papers on safety industry trends, information for our clients. And we wanted to share this with you and our wider LinkedIn network. So this is an interactive live show. Please feel free to, drop any comments or, questions within the comment box. They're very much encouraged. I will come to you as soon as the kind of conversation allows. And this is streamed to LinkedIn, Twitter, and will be on our YouTube to review after. So for our 11th instalment of this show, we are discussing a really interesting topic today, why we need to take more risks with our health and safety communication. So to help me with this topic, we have a fantastic guest speaker. Huge welcome to Karen Hewitt. So Karen is a specialist in engagement communication for health, safety and well-being. So after 10 years designing, delivering health and safety engagement programs for two really large organisations, she set up her own company, Leaderlike. So that's supporting health and safety directors in their efforts to engage both senior leadership and employees in this critical topic. So in 2021, she published People Power, so transform your business in the era of safety and well-being. The book was nominated Distinguished Favourite in the International Press Awards last year and award-winning finalist in the International Book Awards, also 2022. So it has been an Amazon #1 bestseller several times since the launch. And I suppose without further ado, I need to pass you over to Karen to give an overview. So welcome, Karen. If you could give us an overview of yourself, your career to this point and your current role, that would be great. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Lauren. Absolutely delighted to be on this half-hour live with you with a bit of a provocative topic. So I'm excited to see what people make of it. That was just a great introduction, really, which sums up what I do. So I thought what I might mention is maybe 3 sort of past lives that people don't know about me, which might give you a bit of a hint around why I believe I'm good at what I do and why I was meant to do what I do. Because the first thing that I did, which you may not know, is back when I was about sort of 28, 30, after doing my MBA, I took a real interest in and shine to, I guess, the idea of strategic thinking and strategy. So I was invited to lecture for a year in strategy. So strategy really is about taking the big picture and being able to sort of take a bit of a systems view, which I realized I was good at. And because I was lecturing in it at quite a young age, I had to quickly become good at reading the room, working the room. Otherwise, I would have been eaten for breakfast, an English term for you've got to really hit the ground running. And then the second thing that I do that people may not know is after that, I worked for an amazing software company in Scotland, which launched a mind mapping application called Mind Genius. So I was really immersed in that. I was the marketing manager responsible for launching that product. And I actually use that mind mapping software in everything I do. And the idea of mind mapping is that the brain stores information in little sort of buckets based on themes. And if you know what those buckets are, you can toggle at any time between the big picture and the detail. And then the third thing that I did was I went on to train as a simultaneous conference interpreter, and I passed the exam to get into the United Nations, again, working with masses of information that was coming in 90 miles an hour, and I had to process it quickly and output it in a coherent fashion. So again, you had to be really good at managing large amounts of information, finding what was important, and at any time knowing what was the big picture and what was the detail. So the reason I wanted to mention those 3 things, because it's only in hindsight when I look back and I realize how much I'm using my transferable skills for health and safety, because today is all about how to take more risk with your communications. And the 3 things that I work with clients on is transformational leadership, which is really how to communicate for change, how to make, for long-term change within organizations. Change communications, how to communicate so that people do things differently, and also strategic thinking, so that ability really to take a systems view and go back into the detail. Wow. So that's what I do really on a day-to-day basis. I help health and safety teams be better at communicating to save lives.
That's fantastic. And I bet you've been even more busy over the last few years with all the kind of evolving that and navigating all of the change that's happened to all businesses, especially with health and safety. I've seen the kind of brunt of it. So thank you ever so much for that, Karen. That is really interesting, and facts that I definitely didn't know there. So yeah, you'll have to teach me about mind mapping. That is what I need in my current role. That's something to go from detail to the bigger picture. That's really fascinating. So I do find, as you've said there, a bit of a provocative topic, but it's intriguing. So can you tell us more about what it means to take risks? What exactly you mean, to take risks with health and safety communication, and why this is important for the industry?
Yeah, the reason I wanted to talk about this is because as a health and safety profession, we're all about reducing the risk to as low as is reasonably practicable. So in reducing those risks, we tend to take a methodical, strategic approach. We do our risk assessments and we put control measures in place. But what we don't often think about is potentially through the way we communicate for health and safety, how we, and this is the provocative bit, maybe inadvertently introducing more risk into the system. Because if we're not communicating our solutions and our methods well, and it's lost in communication and people aren't taking it in, then potentially people could be more at risk. So that's on the one hand. And also, if you think about when we've got incidents and near misses and we look at a root cause analysis, when we start to drill down on the root causes, we might get to something like poor communication being either a main or a contributory cause. But do we ever ask ourselves the question, what is poor communication? What element was it that was poor? And what do we need to be doing differently? So it's a topic I feel that we don't, it's seen as kind of a fluffy topic, communication, but from my perspective, there's actually a science to it in terms of what you're trying to achieve and the reasons why you might want to do it. So that's why I wanted to talk about it today. And I guess there's potentially 3 areas that we might want to look at, which I've made a note of here. So I guess number 1, first of all, as health and safety professionals, we're trained and we're paid to provide solutions, to give people answers. So I can see why we would do that. We need those solutions to keep people safe. We're the experts. But the downside of that, where we might introduce more risk into the system, is that nobody really likes being told what to do. And the more you give people the answers, the less people are engaged. So the way around that is to ask more open questions so that people take ownership and provide their own solutions.
Yeah.
The second I guess, opportunity with communication is we tend to provide more extensive solutions because we need to cover all the scenarios and all the risks. But actually, we could then potentially go into information overload and people can't remember anything. If we give them too much, they take in nothing. So we need to look at how we use summarizing techniques. And I'm thinking about what I said about mind mapping earlier, to say, well, okay, this is the detail, but here's the big picture, so that people know what those keywords are, so that they can remember and recall the whole thing when they need to. And then finally, you've got, when you're presenting information, we tend to be wedded to PowerPoint. There's a great TED talk called Death by PowerPoint. If anyone hasn't seen it, go and look it up. But we use PowerPoint for speed. We use it because it's the business status quo. Nobody's going to say, why are you using that PowerPoint? We've never used that before. But also you can tend to hide behind PowerPoint. You use it as a prop. It's for you. You put all your notes on the slide. It's not geared up for the end user. The end user is probably more likely to engage in a way their brain works, in those little buckets of information. If you connect on an emotional level using a story, for example. So I guess to sum up, when I'm talking about taking more risks with your communication. I'm thinking about getting out of your comfort zone sometimes and making sure the communication method you're using is going to really impact people and influence them to do what you want them to do, rather than introducing more risk into the system.
Yeah, definitely. That's really interesting. I think your point there on the TED Talk death by PowerPoint, and after nearly a decade in recruitment, I've seen it so many times in interview processes, in onboarding, right through. It just seems like the automatic kind of everyone reverts to it when they've got a lot of information to get across. So a lot of our viewers today, Karen, they're senior safety directors, they're quite senior in their field. What positive steps can they take to change their communication style? So how do they build confidence away from the typical PowerPoint, especially when some may not like public speaking and presenting without that kind of comfort blanket there of a PowerPoint?
Okay, so first of all, just to give a bit of comfort here, I'm not saying throw everything we already do out of the window, because it's got us to where we are. There's times when you need to communicate in a way that provides solutions. You need to communicate on PowerPoint, and you need to give all the information. So you don't need to throw that all out the window. But so it's not an either or, but there may be moments when you need to be really sure that the information has got through and people are digesting it. So there's an opportunity to go a step further. So, for example, even within PowerPoint, you could tell a story which backs up a picture on your slide. So instead of having all the bullet points, you put a picture that reminds you of the story you want to tell, and you tell a story around it, and the brains will instantly engage with the picture and the story.
Yeah.
There may be, so let's say, for example, you're doing a health and safety induction, and I've been through a few myself when I visited sites. And someone will usually just give you all the things that you need to remember, and at the end of it, you're thinking, "Wow, where do I start?" And so sometimes I actually do a little bit provocatively. I say, "Okay, if there's just one thing I need to remember on this site today, what is it?" But really, what I'm looking for is them to say, "Okay, I've given you all the information. If you remember nothing else today, here's the 3 key points."
Yes.
Um, and also you could include some storytelling in there as well. You could include some open questions at the end and say, what bits do you remember of this induction? So it's not a case of getting rid of all the old stuff, but sort of
No.
adding, some new ways of communicating to your repertoire, so that you make sure absolutely that what you've said has been understood. And also maybe rethinking our measure of success for communication, because I tend to use the mantra, the meaning of communication is the response you get. So if you've done a presentation, you say, "Any questions?" and you get 0 response. It's not about them, it's about you, because you're more likely to get a response if you change the "any questions" to "what do you think?" You take a pause, you look people in the eye, and you make it clear from your body language that you're waiting to hear what they think. And they'll
Yeah.
slowly start to give you what they think. So, start to measure the success of your communication by looking into people's eyes, not too much, but, reading what's in their eyes, looking at their body gestures, and thinking, have I got them thinking here? Have they taken this in? So that's another thing you can do. And I guess another thing you can do when you're presenting, because you mentioned fear of public speaking, which is meant to be the one of the biggest fears after spiders and death. So quite scary stuff.
Yeah. Right up there.
When I've got somebody that has got a fear of public speaking, I say, imagine you've got a giant hula hoop of energy around you, and you're slowly transferring it over to the audience. So the hula hoop of energy is appearing around them instead. So you're focusing all your energy on them and giving them what they need and making them feel more comfortable with engaging with this, because as you focus on making them feeling more comfortable, actually you become more comfortable as well, because it's like the metaphorical spotlight comes off you and you start to see the good feedback. You read it in their body language and their eyes and their smiles that they're loving the way you're communicating, and that makes you relax even more.
Yeah, Definitely. I think that's great. And I resonate with your point earlier, when you mentioned about asking an open question. So rather than that kind of closed yes or no, do you have any questions? Right, no, let's move on. It's asking the right questions to get that engagement back, which I think is really important. So I know that you've mentioned storytelling a few times today, Karen. I'm intrigued to learn a little bit more. So can you give us examples of how storytelling can lead to positive results, and where and how should this be used? Because especially in safety, when you might have to get a real serious message across, how does that all work?
Yeah, so first thing to say is that anyone can be a good storyteller, because when I teach storytelling, there seems to be a bit of a myth floating around that you're either a good storyteller or you're not. And you will
Yeah.
notice people that are naturally telling stories, but actually, when you put people on the spot, anyone can tell a story, because we all know we all have stories within us, and we've been brought up listening to stories, reading stories. Um, the difference is the people that are really good at it tend to be the people that have actually thought up front, who is my audience? What is the message that I need to give them? And what do I need to do differently? And then they just practice and they become better and better. I mean, there is a bit of a science around storytelling, but again, the myth is it's a bit of a dark art, and you can either do it or you can't. And for safety, it's really important, because there is a statistic from Jerome Brunner, a cognitive psychologist, who says that you're 22 times more likely to remember facts presented in a story than in a straight presentation, or just presented
Mhm.
as straight facts, because it's the way it's packaged makes you relate quicker, you connect. For example, if there's a bit in the story that has you sort of hanging on thinking, wow, what's going to happen next, that sort of raises your dopamine, the hormone of anticipation. If there's something in the part where it makes you feel a bit emotional, you can really relate to the story, that raises your oxytocin, which means you're more likely to feel empathy and do something differently. And what we
Yes.
want for health and safety is for people to listen to your story and go, right, from now on, I'm going out and I'm slowing down when I drive, or something like that. So you can use stories. If it was me in a large organization, I'd be using stories to convey my golden rules, because you can tell people what to do, but you know, people will probably say yes, whatever.
Yeah.
But if you tell people a story, the story allows you to transmit the why and the potential consequences in a less confrontational way. So you could,
Mhm.
any safety message you can use in a story. So you could use it for your rules, you could use it for a safety moment. You can start getting senior leaders starting a storytelling campaign, which is something else I've done, telling their own
Mhm.
safety stories, asking other people to record their own on video. And you can use them to tell good stories, things that people have done. Let's say somebody intervened and saved a life. You could tell a good news story so that people know they need to do the same. So to reinforce positive behaviors, you can use them for lessons learned. You can just use them for everything. People love stories, and probably the single most important thing you could do to have a positive safety culture is start telling stories.
Yeah. Okay, fantastic. Oh, that's really interesting. So I suppose that leads me nicely into the next question. So again, a lot of safety, as I've come to understand, is around influencing, and not just colleagues, co-workers, but influencing stakeholders and other leaders. So how can safety professionals achieve this? With their communication style, how can they influence others?
Yeah, so I guess the first thing that I do is, before I go into any situation where I know I've got to influence and I'm potentially going to come up against resistance, is I've got
Mhm.
some sort of little methods that I use to think through my conversation in advance. So although the conversation may be spontaneous, I've thought through, who is the person I'm speaking to, from what I know about them, what's their communication and thinking style, sort of visual, auditory, do they like things in flow charts? How do they want to receive their information? What kind of keywords do they use? Think about, when I've talked to them before, what kind of language do they use? And what might be their vision for the future? What drives them? What's their challenges? So we sometimes think about our sort of target audience, but we don't go deeper than that and try and really get in their shoes. And okay, you can never really totally get in somebody's shoes, but you can, the more you start to imagine, it does become easier and easier to try and be more consciously aware on how you open a conversation, where you can really just tap into what they might need from you right now. So you can do that to prepare for the conversation. And then when you get into the conversation, if you meet resistance, particularly if somebody is higher up than you in the hierarchy or perceived hierarchy, like there might be a client with more perceived power, or which would make things sort of the double impact here, if you're in a group of their peers where they don't want to be seen to be challenged, then think about challenging less directly and more indirectly. So, if somebody disagrees with you head on, don't go back and say, well, I'm sorry, I disagree with you on that, because that will just get people frustrated and potentially impact the relationship. So you think about going more around the side and indirectly, with indirect methods like using quotes or metaphors or even stories. For example, I keep a lot of really inspirational quotes up my sleeve that they just sort of seem to come out of my mouth when I just need them. If somebody's challenging what is possible, for example, I don't believe that, then instead of saying, well, yes, it is possible, you can say, well, I just think about what Henry Ford used to say, whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right. And then you let that sink down. So you're not sort of challenging, you're challenging in a friendly way, which preserves your credibility, it preserves theirs, but it allows the thought to sort of sink in a little bit, and then you can maybe reduce the resistance without really tackling it head on.
Yeah, definitely. I like the fact that indirect approach as well, because as you say, sometimes if you haven't got that relationship there where you can be direct and say, well, no, this is the way it's going to be, especially in safety, it is around building relationships. And from what you said earlier, Karen, communication is seen as a soft skill, but it really isn't, and it's so essential. I mean, we've had a comment here saying, I agree very much with the storytelling approach. This is from Kizzy, who's a health and safety lawyer, and she mentioned that clients certainly take heed of lessons learned through storytelling and case studies, and I think that's really important. It's convincing, especially with senior leaders, she said, and I think that is really important, isn't it? Case studies, storytelling, it all comes into one. It's to use something else rather than, well, this is what I'm saying and you must listen. It's around having that more conversational approach. And people resonate with stories, as you said. So I find that really interesting. Is there ever a time that you wouldn't use storytelling to convey a message?
Yeah, I was just actually going to add to that, to say I'm not advocating throwing the direct approach out of the window, because there's times when you just got to be really clear and direct. So with everything I'm saying, I'm not saying, we're doing it all wrong. I'm just saying, give yourself a bit more flexibility as a communicator, because communication is all about the context. It depends on who you're speaking to and what the situation is as to what tool you would choose. So, for example, crisis communication. So let's imagine there was a fire alarm or an incident in a building and everyone needed to get out quickly. So everyone is trained to communicate directly. You may not be shouting at people, but you've probably got a slightly raised voice, very assertive, and you're being really clear with your instructions. So if somebody is in imminent danger, then you're not going to stand there and tell a story, because you can't risk it being misunderstood, and you haven't got the time to tell a story, because a story will take longer. So of course there are times when you just need to communicate top down, when speed is of the essence and fast impact is of the essence, and there's an imminent danger.
Yeah, definitely. No, I totally get that. And I think, from today's session with yourself, Karen, I've understood that, of course, everyone says communication's key, but I really like the fact that you said it's not about throwing away what you do now with PowerPoints and with direct communication. It's about adapting it to the situation. That's what I've personally taken, and I'm sure our audience today have as well. So is there anything else that we've had a couple of comments here. Damien said, I think the soft skills are the ones we as health and safety leaders need to focus our energy and development on, which I think is true. I think from safety recruitment point of view, it's very much competency based and qualifications, but this is a huge skill that you need to influence and to keep people safe and eliminate that risk. So yeah, I think that's been great. Is there anything else that you'd like to add, Karen?
Yeah, I guess when I was talking earlier about information overload and health and safety as a profession is getting more and more complex. And as well as having that mind mapping approach with the information in buckets, I think it's really important to remember, for those that don't know, there's some research carried out by Miller years ago, and it's affectionately called Miller's magic number. And it says that the human brain is only able to store a certain number of elements in working memory, and that's 5 plus or minus 2. So you're working between 5 and 9 elements. So if you've got a procedure, for example, or an induction that's got more than between 5 and 9 points, there's a good chance, and I talked about introducing risk into the system, that people aren't going to remember it. So when I'm communicating directly, like now I'm communicating directly, I'm doing a little bit of storytelling. I guess I did a little bit at the beginning, but I'm mainly communicating in 2 or 3 points. So I take Miller's magic number and I whittle it down to 3, because even if you prepare 3 points, I've had to look sideways a couple of times. Even 3 points you struggle to remember. You start with, I'm going to tell you 3 things, and then you remember 2 of them. So that gives you a bit of an idea that really, even if you're giving people extensive information for health and safety, you need to be able to boil it down to 3 points, top 3 points, ideally, like an executive summary, or maximum 5 or 7 points. And that's why our phone numbers tend to be in groups of 5 to 9, so we can remember them. Otherwise, our brains have got no chance.
Yeah, definitely. I like that. I like the kind of power of 3. I think that's really important. I've heard of that from a marketing standpoint, especially, but I suppose that definitely is communication, isn't it? And understanding that. So thank you ever so much. I think we're coming towards the end of our session, and that's absolutely flown by as usual. But thank you ever so much for joining us today, Karen. It's been really insightful. Me personally, I've got some great takeaways from this. And I've always heard the kind of death by PowerPoint, but again, it's not about throwing that away. It's about evolving that, getting your audience to engage. And I like the fact you mentioned a lot of, when you're engaging with someone, regardless if they're a senior stakeholder or you're presenting a health and safety induction, it's about engaging, understanding what their body language looks like. And the most important key takeaway for me was asking open questions. I think the minute you ask closed questions, you're getting yes and no answers, you run out of places to go. So that, alongside the storytelling, has been absolutely fantastic. And we've had some great comments today. So if anyone does have any further questions, you can contact Karen on LinkedIn. She kindly said that you can pop over to her LinkedIn page. I'll put the link in the comments so you can take a look at Karen's, of course, profile, but also her award-winning books. I think you definitely need to check them out. People Power. So yes, it's been an absolutely great session. Laura is back for the next session next month, which I think is the 20th of July. I hope that I've got that right. Yes, 20th of July. And we are joined by another special guest on that day, which is Dr. Andrew Sharman. So that should be an interesting session as well. So any questions, please direct to Karen. But it was lovely having you on today. Really appreciate it. And thank you everyone for your comments. It's been great. So thank you ever so much.
Thanks, Lauren. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.